Hi everyone, thank you for attending this week's UMIP community call. We have 3 UMIPs up for discussion this week. PolygonTVL, removing SGT and SDT, and one for staked out KPI options. If we just go straight into PR, oh, I'm not sharing my screen, hang on. Sorry. Okay, if we just start going straight into the add PolygonTVL. Renus, you were going to record on the Notion what the outcomes were. Are you good to do that?
Yes, you can do it. Can you send? Okay, I'll check the link. Just a sec.
So I think recording this one will be pretty easy, at least from my perspective. I think the blockers that we brought up last week were there's no historical price endpoint, and also we needed like a methodology explanation on how the Polygon TVL was calculated.
Did you see that they did make some edits there?
Yep.
And there is some kind of methodology, but I didn't really follow it, to be honest. Let me see if I can. They put a link.
Is there a methodology?
They put a link somewhere.
Oh, the GitHub link?
I think that might be it. That one, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, so that is helpful, and I missed that GitHub link. I guess like the problems that I still see, and I don't know, this is something to discuss, is if this is going to be used for a liquidatable contract, the historical data API that they provided is only available on, or at least like the one that's listed returns, I think, price data like by day. They listed by hour, but the last time I looked at it, looked like it was by day. Did anybody else look at this?
Yeah, I had a quick look and I couldn't see it by any greater granularity than by day.
So if it is being used in a liquidatable contract, that seems like a problem, because it basically means it's very hard to dispute liquidations. I think for things like LSPs, where you only need it for settlement, it's slightly better, but still not optimal, because you'll just be settling on like a daily price instead of something more specific. But that's probably okay.
I've had a bit of a chat with the authors of this, and they seem to be aware. It's Krill that I've been talking to. They seem to be aware that it's not ideal for an EMP, and they're looking into LSPs. It might be worth you having a direct chat with them to see, you know, what we might need to do to get this through. Because I think they're struggling to find what we need.
Okay. I think it'd also be good to just encourage them to have a conversation on GitHub, because I think me and Rainus had left a few comments and there just wasn't a lot of response. So
they seem to think, last conversation I had with Krill was that they had addressed by edit. So even though they hadn't addressed the comments, they had addressed the substantive of the comments, but it seems like it's not really comprehensive enough.
I don't
I'll
know.
return back to GitHub and to go through the comments and explain.
Rainus, what do you think?
Yes, I think it definitely, considering the fact that there are some limitation on data availability, this should be tailored more to be fitting for LSP contracts, and also providing some additional caution to the users of the contract, what is like most appropriate and secure way to use it, because there are some limitations on that.
Do you think this should be a blocker for the price identifier?
Not necessarily if the scope of use and warnings are properly disclaimed. I think sure, anybody can build a new contract and use it in unintended ways, but I think what should be like done more by the UMIP writers is to provide more explicit like warnings and intended use, and then I think it's solvable, this data availability issue.
I think beefing up the security considerations is probably significant for this.
Yes.
Okay, so that is a go with conditions.
So the other thing we haven't really talked about is,
Mm-hmm.
I think we generally give direction to people, or like in the best case scenario, we want people to build price feeds for new pricing sources. And this would be one of those.
Mm-hmm.
But we also are kind of relaxed on that, especially for things, for like situations where it's probably not going to be used in a liquidatable contract. What do people think about passing this without a price feed?
I think if there's, so is this going to be like a expiry time kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's just reading from DeFi Llama. So I feel like that's okay. I feel like we've done similar stuff like that before, where it wasn't like fully fleshed out yet, where the bot could propose a price at expiry, but we feel like we can get one together. Like we don't have to invent something crazy new. Also, this may not be relevant if they go to the LSP anyway, which I think makes sense. But if it was liquidatable, wouldn't this just be a self-referential thing until expiry time? If it's like such a long gap between new prices.
It could be a self-referential thing, yeah. Not the way it's written right now, but that's like a decent idea for another design. Although, I don't know. I don't love self-referential contracts, but doesn't mean it shouldn't happen.
Yeah. And I guess if it was okay, so I guess it would have to go in there if it was self-referential. But either way, I mean, LSP makes sense. And I think it's okay as long as there's a commitment to putting together a price feed so the bots can use that to propose at the end. I think that's all right.
As far as I know, they're not working on a price feed and they have no intentions of writing one.
I guess they could also manually propose if it's just a one-off kind of thing. But then if there needs to be a dispute, that could be a problem. Are they open to doing a price feed just so that bots could propose or dispute? Or would they just say, like, we're not too concerned about that?
I don't think they're too concerned about it. I think that if it was a blocker on getting it through, then they may well be motivated to write one.
I think if it's designed to not need a bot, it needs to be specified in the rationale section. Like if they're only going to use it for an LSP or like some of these risks aren't even possibility, they should indicate that somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
that
agree.
makes sense. And they could give a heads up people about like when they plan to make a proposal in case anybody wants to manually dispute on Etherscan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
Well,
it,
but like, yeah, and they won't even really need to do that, right? Since like all contract settlements are announced. I think other stuff that like could use more elaboration is they just list like the historical data API, but don't actually provide any instructions on like how to use it, and it does return like quite a few values. So that would be useful. Yeah. Hey, Matt.
Hey, I might have to go in a minute. I just wanted to hop in and see what's going on for as long as I could.
Sweet.
we're just discussing the PolygonTVL price identifier. We have no price feed, and the data isn't very granular, which we're a bit concerned about.
I see. Why don't we have a price feed?
We haven't written one.
Oh, you mean
Sources,
like a?
DeFi Llama, like an automated price feed, yeah.
I see.
So what do we think the feedback to them is? Is this a go?
So I think with all the things we just talked about,
Mm-hmm.
then yes, it could be a go. But I think all of those are kind of necessary. So definitely contingent on those being added.
Renus, are you okay to update with the contingencies here?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's doable. The list is quite. I think still there's a lot of items to do, but if all of them are met, I think it's good to go with contingencies.
I'll get back in touch with them after this call. I'll point them to this call to see the discussion and the list of contingencies that are outstanding, because I know they are quite keen to get this passed. Okay. The next one is the removing SD and SGT from the collateral currency whitelist. This was a straight go last week, but there were some technical issues why it didn't happen. I take it everyone's keen for it to proceed this week.
I'm curious to hear what Matt thinks about deregistering collateral currencies.
Why do we want to deregister them?
So we had a discussion last week about like when it would be appropriate to, and I think the outcome was basically like when we aren't confident that it will hold like some sort of expected range of future value, because that could affect like the store's ability to do token buybacks and maintain like the PFC cost of corruption inequality, right? And DSD is supposed to be a stable coin, and it's been trading below like 1 cent, I believe. And SGT went through some sort of rug pull. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely like a tricky question. So like if they're dead projects or like projects that we think are kind of zombie projects, I think it makes sense to consider dropping them. I don't. The only risk that that bad collateral currencies pose to the DVM is spam risk. So it doesn't like break any of the like economic guarantees the DVM has. It just means that somebody who's malicious could like spin up a bunch of hit the DVM with a ton of votes for very cheap if they like held a bunch of these tokens, and these tokens like actually went to zero or went very close to zero, and we hadn't updated the final fees. So like, I think it depends on like how close are the final fees on these right now to $400 or to some reasonable value.
They're miles away from it. I did go through and update the final fees last week, but I missed these off because there were so much problems with it.
I see.
DSD is basically not a dollar stable coin. And yeah, it is kind of dead as a stable coin. SGT had a rug pull, and it was one of its developers that is strongly in the frame for this. That was being used for KPI options, and while there might not be technical risk with it, I do think that there's a bit of a concern with reputational risk if we start building KPI options for protocols that are a bit dodgy. And this one doesn't seem to be very robust.
I mean, two comments I would have on that, Vari, would be one, like it's not being used right now. So like the intended use when it was passed was KPI options, right? But it's not actually in any contracts. And then the second would be, I know you and I have this discussion quite a bit around like, should governance be blocking things from being voted on or deregistering collateral types or something because they're potentially risky and there might be some sort of reputational risk associated with it. And at least like my stance is no, but I don't know. That's also kind of an interesting discussion.
I think also in terms of how final fees behave for a token that seems to have failed catastrophically in some way. Like, I don't think that this would be adjusted because of ecosystem-wide dips in prices where, like, as part of a batch now, like, we need to adjust final fees for a lot of stuff across the board. Like, I think if we adjusted these and set it around $400, they could go way off of that, like, kind of quickly and quietly for their own reasons because they're outside of the, I don't know, the group of like tokens that behave in a kind of similar way because they have had these catastrophic failures that are specific to their own project. And so that might be like a convenience thing. Like, sure, you could keep adjusting the final fees, but if it's a token that's not really used as a collateral type and we don't necessarily care if it's used, and it's just kind of a pain to keep adjusting it because it's in this like decoupled failure zone of price behavior, that just might be annoying. And I haven't looked closely enough at their prices besides just the fact that they did seem to go down to about zero. But you know, if they're fluctuating constantly within that range of like between a cent and nothing, it's like,
sorry, go ahead, John.
Oh, that was it.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say if it's a protocol safety thing, I would be more inclined to say, yeah, let's go ahead. If it's more of a reputational risk or annoyance, maybe it's worth drumming up some more conversation in the voting channel prior to putting it up for vote to see kind of what the consensus is. But that is maybe also more of like a broad spectrum governance discussion to have anyways, in terms of how we make or if we make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, I definitely see it as like a reputational issue mostly. So I would agree that this should be like brought up for wider like discussion in that sense, as it's not like technical issue.
And there's and just glancing at the prices, it looks like DSD kind of settled around its range. It actually is kind of moving reasonably. Like it's not getting back to $1 by any means, but it's also not going to 0 rapidly. SGT is a little bit more annoying in like the respect I was bringing up, because it's down by 99.1% in 30 days, 97.6% in 14 days, 35.5% in 7 days, and 4.4% in the last 24 hours. So if it's down at whatever it is right now, it's like 3.5 cents. I don't have any reason to think it wouldn't go to 1 cent in like a 4-hour period and throw off the final fees again. You know what I mean? Where DSD is kind of hovering around 1 cent and not moving too much from that.
I like the idea of discussing it. Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, this is SGT you're talking about, John?
Yeah, and that was the one that there was like the rug pull.
Is this Space Goat token?
It's shared stake.
Shared stake
governance token. No, but we should list Space Goat token.
Oh, is it SSGT? Is it SSGT?
Well, no, it's just SGT. Wait, what's
I can't
Space
find this
Goat
on
token?
CoinGecko. I looked up. Oh,
like,
is this? Wait, what? Oh, shared stake. Okay, I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Okay, I see it. Sorry, a rug pull.
Let's rewrite the UMIP to just redirect SGT to the Space Goat token. Let's look this up. I'm gonna look up Space Goat token. But yeah, yeah, I guess rug pulled tokens have more dramatic intraday downward price behavior than like an algorithmic stablecoin that didn't seem to really work out.
I mean, I would be happy removing it just because I think it's I don't think we should remove it as like a reputational risk, but more as like it's a dead token, like the project is dead, and there's no, like, if we think that this rug pull like has effectively killed the project, there's no reason to like have the token be used in our ecosystem, because we see it on a trajectory to 0, which is the failure mode for spam resistance.
Yes, and
whereas
there's
like
a
DSD doesn't seem to be the same. Sorry, go ahead. What did you say?
Yes, so sorry, I was just going to add that it also means that there is no like practical use case, and the intended use case which was there when UMIP was written is not there anymore. So
exactly, precisely, yeah, exactly.
I think that kind of raises the broader question, though, and maybe where some of Sean's hesitation comes from is that a type of stance that we want to take on a regular basis? Do we want to declare things not fit for use, or do we just want to allow people to? Sorry, that wasn't a fully baked thought. I think I was just trying to say, like, is that a stance that we want to make on a regular basis? Like, this isn't useful anymore, so therefore let's take it away.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. The thing I'd hang my hat on is if a project is, I think usefulness is probably not the metric I would want to use. I think I'd want to use like the project is dead, so it is so that the community thinks that the token introduces spam risk to the protocol. So like we think the token will likely go to 0, which means we have no way to make the final fee high enough so that people can't spam the protocol by just buying a billion of these tokens for 1 cent, and then spamming the protocol. So it creates a risk for us. And I think that tokens that are classified as like rug pulled or dead or zombie tokens would all be in the category of their price is basically going to go to 0. So we think that it's a risk to keep them in. I think any token where there is no risk to the protocol to keep them in, there should be no reason to really remove them. Under Sean's, if you're like going extreme on Sean's stance, where you say like the only reason we would exclude a collateral currency is because it's dangerous. The only danger of the protocol is if the price goes to 0. So I think that's what I would say here.
I agree with that. Do we think DSD fits that criteria as well?
It doesn't look like it's going to 0, and it doesn't. And there's no like if you go to like CoinGecko, you don't see like a warning like this is, this has been rug pulled or whatever. So it looks like it's actually stable around 1 cent and it has been for a while. So it's not as clear to me that project is dead. But I could be wrong.
It doesn't look like one that we'd have to adjust the final fees every single voting cycle because it's like hurtling towards 0.
Cool. So suggested adjustment would be remove DSD from the UMIP and just deregister SGT.
Yeah, maybe if the final fees aren't correct on DSD, maybe change the final fees on DSD.
Definitely.
But I think Brittany's suggestion to open both of these questions up in the voting channel is a really good one. Like, I would love to get the community's opinion on both these projects, because maybe the community thinks that we should remove both, and like that would be fine with me too. Like, if that's what the voters want, then like that is kind of our obligation at the end of the day.
And I guess at a practical level, do we have a script for removing collateral types, or do we just need to like write one?
We're gonna have to write.
Okay. All right. So if we do wind up doing like adjusting DSD's fee and then removing SGT instead of just removing both, we'll also need to probably split this into 2 UMIPs because it's going to be 2 different proposal transactions.
And we could squat. Yeah, we could. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, but yeah, we could figure that out. I guess we'll see how people feel.
I mean, I think they are. I think they should be split into 2 UMIPs because they are completely separate concerns.
Agreed.
Unless we're doing the same thing on both, unless we're removing both.
Yep.
Okay. I guess the outcome from that then is that we have a further discussion around DSD, but SGT is good to go. Would that be right?
Good to not go. Yeah,
Good to not
be removed.
Cool. Okay. Okay, and the last one was the UTVL KPI SDT, which is a KPI options identifier. There was some discussion on this and we had contingencies for it. I don't know if there's been any further correspondence with Deadcoin about these.
Yep. So I've been talking to Deadcoin, and I'd closed this PR because somebody who wasn't the UMIP author had actually opened that. So thought it made more sense to just have the discussion on the author's PR. So there's another one open for that. And just to summarize last week's contingencies, it was pretty similar to the PolygonTVL one, right? We needed a historical price source, and we also needed some explanation around the methodology on how to calculate STT's TVL instead of just providing the price. I don't think either one of those have been addressed.
So it's a go with those contingencies again.
Yeah, I think we should probably, I mean, like I communicated with the team some, but I think it depends on their response, but I would expect it probably is not going to go up for a vote. But yeah, I go with those contingencies again.
Okay. Renus, have you managed to update this? If I refresh, does that work?
Yes, no, not the last one, but the first 2 I did have on that. Yeah, you can refresh.
Okay.
One question about the price identifiers. I saw there was like a DeFi Llama one on there. DeFi Llama, as far as I'm aware, is an aggregator. Is that correct? Like they don't actually, they're not producing the prices themselves. They're like taking prices from exchanges and then doing some math and then giving you a price, right?
Yeah, like CoinGecko.
What is our policy on that? On using those as price sources for UMIPs?
So
Or do we have a policy?
I don't think we have a hard policy. I think it depends on the complexity of the calculation. Because obviously you would prefer not to use an aggregator. But for some things like Polygon's TVL, for example, where like by definition, you kind of need some sort of aggregation. I think it's okay.
Why do you need aggregation for Polygon's TVL?
How else would you get Polygon's TVL? Like you could look at Polygon and you could do the calculation all yourself. But
You
is
just need
that
the
like
price and the
actually
tokens,
useful?
right?
No, I think it's like all tokens on Polygon.
Oh, I see. I didn't know what you meant by Polygon TVL. Right. I was thinking of market cap, not TVL. I'm an idiot. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. That would be challenging. So yeah, as long as I think using DeFi Llama in that case would be reasonable, but I think DeFi Llama does expose a way of like normal. I think most of their that the way they compute most of these things is open source somewhere. So it might be nice to at least have a link to like their methodology for computing it or something. Because at the end of the day, like somebody like these aggregators have some methodology for computing these things, and it's nice if we're able to not have to 100% rely on the aggregator in the worst case if the aggregator goes down or something happens or I don't know, like we just stop trusting that aggregator or the aggregator becomes malicious or whatever. You want some way of kind of double checking.
Yeah.
Is that not what the GitHub link does?
I actually think there's like kind of a nuanced difference between just providing a link to DeFi Llama's code and explaining like the actual methodology in the UMIP, where just like providing a link to the code, that code could change, right? And we could stop trusting that aggregator. Yeah.
So you can link to a commit hash on GitHub. You can say like, I want this code at this commit hash, and that's unchangeable. Like there's no way they could corrupt that unless GitHub gets corrupted.
Do we trust GitHub? GitHub, the ultimate middleman?
Yeah, I mean, they could change our UMIPs under our feet too.
Well, even if they corrupted GitHub, they couldn't corrupt the hash. If people had the Git repo, people just need to, just keep your local clones and challenge GitHub on their lies.
But yeah, I was just wondering, like, mainly it was more of a question, like, do we trust, are we trusting these aggregators outright, or like how much kind of verification are we doing around the trust for an aggregator specifically?
How much of that decision is ours if the creator of this price ID feels comfortable with that level of security in deploying their contract? Like, does that actually open up liability to the DVM, or does that open up liability to the deployer of the contract?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's arguable that like they should be responsible for their own security.
Also, we had kind of had this discussion maybe like 6 months ago when somebody had proposed DeFi Pulse TVL, and originally they were just doing like DeFi TVL, and we kind of talked about like the product consideration here where it's like not actually tracking the DeFi TVL, it's tracking like DeFi pulses of DeFi TVL, because those things are not necessarily equal. And so they like rename the price identifier to be like DeFi Pulse TVL. So yeah, I do think it's kind of a product question, Brett.
Not an easy one to answer.
But I mean, like, I guess like this comes back to like one of the things that we talk about a lot with the DVM. Like, is the DVM supposed to use subjective judgment to make sure that prices are not manipulated or corrupted in any way, beyond the, you know, basically, are the DVM voters supposed to interpret the intent of the product creator and say, hey, like, you wanted to get an accurate price, and even though we know that DeFi Llama, that we see that DeFi Llama, let's say, is corrupting their price, and so we're actually going to subjectively reevaluate how this should be processed on the spot because we want to protect the intent of the UMIP, which is to get an accurate price. The other way of looking at it is that you go by the letter of the law in the UMIP and say, you know, if DeFi Llama gives me a price that's straight up wrong, fine, I'll take it because like that's what the UMIP tells me to do. And we've for a long time been putting like broad market consensus as a way to get around this, saying like the DVM voters should use this methodology unless it differs from like the broad market consensus, and then they should use their subjective judgment to match that broad market consensus. So yeah, we can still put that here in this case and just have the voters subjectively verify. The other way we've kind of tried to make it, I think one of the things we tried to do in the past is make us rely as little as possible on that broad market consensus by making sure the UMIPs are as well specified as possible or as kind of incorruptible in the way they're designed as possible. But maybe we should just feel comfortable relying more on that broad market consensus and say like, hey, like let them use DeFi Llama or let them use whatever kind of aggregator they want and like not worry too much about it as long as it's well specified. And then if we need to have the voters override it at the last minute because DeFi Llama is doing something weird or something's broken, then we'll figure it out at the time, you know, when it comes up. And that might, I don't know, might be the better approach.
There's also something that I forget if it was Vari or Sean or somebody else that brought this up, but for the crypto pairs generalized identifier, being able to specify which market you want to get information from, which I guess you could use if you wanted to get a specific market, even if that market is haywire in some way. And that could open up interesting use cases where, for instance, you have a lot of exposure to whatever's happening on Binance or on Kraken or something. And if something horrible happens to one of those exchanges, your price identifier could specify that exchange, and it's like a way to hedge your risk. In which case it's like, okay, this is a bad price, but that's kind of like the point. Like we wanted to get what the price is here because that's the specific risk that we're trying to identify. And that might apply in these kind of cases where, you know, DeFi Pulse doesn't have all of DeFi's TVL, obviously. Only kind of recently got UMAs, for instance. But you might only care about DeFi Pulse. So it depends on really what you want. And ancillary data lets you get more specific with it without necessarily baking it into a UMIP.
It seems like a lot of like these source specific questions pertain mostly to programming bots. Because I think in the event that a price is requested, like the one that we had recently where we decided that Kraken was a better source, you know, people do sort of come together and make proposals in the voting discussion section based on whatever comes up. And I think allowing more flexibility in that instead of making it have to be more clearly defined might encourage more voter participation. Because right now, including myself, even after doing a price settlement with Sean, I still mostly rely on the values that you guys come up with for voting. And so maybe less clarity in instances where bots aren't necessary is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Just an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Less clarity, but I think John brings up an interesting point with like, I don't know, sometimes not falling back to that broad market consensus clause is like what people actually want, which is like kind of a hard thing to get around. So maybe it should just be like, we can fall back to broad market consensus if it's in the UMIP, and then we can do stuff like you're talking about, Britt, where like things are less specified and we're following like a general methodology rather than direct specifications, but we can also allow for the other thing.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It sort of depends on what each product wants in terms of what their oracle looks like, I guess.
Yeah. It's also a really like unique situation that we probably shouldn't even design for, where people want direct exposure to like a specific market. But I don't know.
I think overall this is like largely a governance discussion, unless should we pass this specific UMIP. I think if we're going forward, like for today, we just go based on precedent, like what have we done before. But then it would be good to set aside some time and brain space for thinking about addressing these like in a bigger picture going forward.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I think the precedent right now is that we should be able to fall back to broad market consensus, which necessitates having some sort of methodology defined in the UMIP, or a link to a specific GitHub commit hash or something. Yeah,
agreed. And this might be an instance where the original author of this UMIP is a superhuman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you feel confident in their ability to execute that, or do you think that this is a point where maybe they need a little bit more help in handing off to an UMIP team person? Should we try and get Chandler more involved at this stage?
Actually, sorry. The STT UMIP is, I think we switched from talking to about the STT one back to the Polygon one, or I don't know. I got confused.
Okay,
but,
I was talking about STT specifically, just trying not to let a whole nother week go by without making progress. Just want to make sure that like the most capable person is involved.
So really, we had this discussion last week again, and like especially for things like KPI options, it seems like it works a lot better if the actual project team is writing the UMIP, because they know what they want on KPI options, and they know how their protocol works and how to calculate their TVL and all of that. So I do think the ball's like in STT's court now, because like I have communicated like the exact requirements that are needed.
Okay, cool.
Okay, just to draw things back, in terms of the outcomes for the UMIPs this week, for PolygonTVL and PolygonTVLinv, we've got go with contingencies. That it needs an API methodology, security considerations and rationale, discussing the limitations of data availability and intended use for LSP contracts. Then for 342, we've got a no-go, and we're going to put the details up for wider discussion in the voting channel. And then for 342,
was that our outcome on the DSD and SGT one?
It's regarding DSD and SGT.
this one.
Oh, maybe I wasn't listening. I thought we decided that it'd be good to move forward with deregistering SGT and then have more discussion on DSD.
Okay, my understanding was to bring everything for the discussion.
That's fine too.
Okay, so will we put them both back for further discussion?
It sounds like either way they might need to be split into two separate proposals, but I personally don't have an issue either way. I don't think one more week of discussion is going to put anything at a greater risk personally. So I'm fine with that.
Yep. And we're also setting better precedents if we do that, and it doesn't seem urgent to deregister it. So.
And then for UTVL KPI SDT as price identifier, we've got a no-go. We did have a go last time with contingencies. Are we just accepting that there isn't enough time for the contingencies are so extensive that they're not practical to get resolved by Thursday?
I think they have the same blockers as the PolygonTVL UMIP.
Pretty much.
I would say go with contingencies in case they pull it together. I wouldn't want to prevent that from going through if they're able to. I just think we sort of have the expectation that it's probably not going to be fulfilled.
All right.
Okay, so our contingencies are the same as last week?
Yep.
Okay, I'll add them in. Super. Is there anything else people wanted to discuss?
I don't think so.
Nope. I had a broad question, not for like this call, but for probably the people on this call. If anybody's available offline, I would love to know more about like why the final fees are denominated in the collateral currency. Just kind of like a more in-depth view of that, because I still don't quite understand that. So if anybody's available, let me know.
Instead of being denominated in like USD or something?
Yeah. I know it's a contract thing. I just don't understand it. So I just thought I would ask.
I think the idea, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, John.
Oh, I was going to say my slightly guesswork understanding of it is just for convenience, because that's what's getting locked up as collateral in a contract. So if the final fees are getting paid out by the contract, if it was denominated in like ETH or USD or C or something, you would need to like add an additional kind of token to that contract instead of just paying it out of the locked collateral.
Is that a difficult thing to accomplish?
It's a little bit more annoying.
Okay.
It would also be interesting. Yeah.
Like, I'm just wondering if it's more annoying than having to keep adjusting final fees and answer questions and talk about like the risk of currency adjustments and final fees, or if it's just like, do we just put it in USDC so that it doesn't matter what the collateral currency does?
So there's multiple ways to kind of get around this restriction that we could do, and I think it's a really good question, and something that that's definitely a pain on everybody's side. So, but to backtrack a little bit, the reason we did it this way originally is the contract has a currency in it, doesn't have and the contract is not. There's no like. The only people who are there to pay the final fees generally are the people who are participating in the contract, and those people already have, whatever the collateral currency they put into the contract. Let's say I have an EMP position, right? That means I have a bunch of, let's say the collateral currency in that case is ETH. I already have a bunch of ETH in the contract, so it's really easy for the contract to pay out that ETH. If you set it in USDC, you might require everybody to put a little bit of USDC in, or like you might have to have somebody specific come in to pay that final fee in USDC. So you're kind of relying on some central party to come and interact with the contract. So it becomes less autonomous. So the reason we did it this way is basically like use what the contract already has instead of trying to involve some sort of outside mechanism. But with the optimistic oracle and some of the newer developments in UMA, we have more flexibility here. On one hand, like you can have, you could potentially allow the deployer, since the LSP contract that we've recently released does not require like liquidations and stuff, so that you might have to have a lot of final fees flow through the contract. Instead, it only requires one final fee, and that's at settlement. And so this means that you could actually have the deployer who deploys the contract preload the contract with a bunch of with the fee that needs to be paid. And then that means that you could just denominate it in, you could say that fee is just denominated in USDC while the contract is denominated in some, the collateral currencies that all people are exchanging when they're interacting with the contract could be a different currency. And that's totally fine. And this is something that's fairly easy to add today. You could also have other adjustments in the way the optimistic oracle works to allow like varied currencies there as well. So with some of the newer developments, this has become a lot easier to do. And if we fully rely on the optimistic oracle to resolve everything, and instead of ever having contracts go directly to the DVM, you could make this like, we could basically have like only one collateral currency or 5 collateral currencies or something, and just leave it at that. And it wouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, and I mean, even when talking about UMIP stuff, which I know we're sort of shifting away from, but it seems like any token sponsor would be able to put up $400 of USDC. Otherwise, whose position is small enough that a final fee is going to put them below a threshold to be liquidated anyways, right? So like if you have enough skin in the game to deploy a contract, it shouldn't be too hard to say like, here's your, like if you want to participate, here's, you have to like pay your request fee upfront or something like that. I don't know. I was just curious. I thought it might help with some future headaches.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of it is more about like, it's less about like the sponsor not having the money, and it's more about like you don't want to make the sponsor do more complicated things. You don't want to have like a make the user experience worse for the sponsor. Yeah. The people we really could make the user experience worse for the EMP is liquidators and disputers, and they tend to be the ones who are actually paying these final fees. So you could force them to come with an additional currency and put that into the contract as well to pay these fees. And that could also work. There's really nothing wrong with that. It just makes it a little bit harder to be a liquidator or disputer.
But does it though? Because for like weird currencies, it makes it so you don't have to get a hold of that.
Well, the funny thing is you still have to post a bond in those weird currencies. So you'd actually need the weird currency plus the other currency. You need like both. Instead of just requiring one currency, you'd require both. So since you already have to put up a bond, it's nice that the final fee is in that same currency. So you just have to put up more of that currency rather than putting up 2 separate ones. And that means you don't have to do as many approvals, and there's all sorts of other like annoying like little bits of UX stuff that makes it a little bit just multiple currencies more annoying than one currency. But I think we have the tools to fix this now. It's something that I'd like to start a discussion on and really start to move forward on is having the optimistic oracle set up to allow people to vary the currencies, but have like a set of currencies that fees are generally paid in, and then basically allow people to use any currency they want outside of that group in their contracts.
Yeah, and it seems like that could be used for bonds too. Like, I know they're paying bonds in the weird currencies, but why? Like, why not just pay a bond in USDC?
So at some point, it becomes an issue of you want to make sure that the bond is correctly sized relative to the amount of damage they could cause by doing the wrong thing. So if your bond is like 5 USDC, but actually you're liquidating a position worth 100 USDC, but because you don't have a price at the time you put up that bond, you don't know what the ratio of like weird currency to USDC is. Okay. You need to have a way to figure that out. And so you might need to actually go to the DVM to ask for a price, which is immediate. So like you have all sorts of like, you have to know how much bond to put up ahead of time. And that's why the bonds need to be in the same currencies. So you don't need a price.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, that one's like much more kind of straightforward. The final fee stuff there's a lot more wiggle room there.
It's also something where adjusting the final fees is annoying, but for UMIP governance, where the other things would be potentially annoying for just like users, where for governance, it's like, well, you're getting like voting rewards and I guess it's fine. I'm wondering if there's something that we could do where final fees could get dynamically set as they go outside of a certain range, and you just propose it to the optimistic oracle to make that update. And if nobody disputes it, it doesn't have to go to a vote and have everybody deal with it. That might be interesting as part of like a overall voting system revamp. and that would take some of the burden off of the UMIP governance side without restructuring everything else around it.
I guess my pushback there would be like, is that a governance decision that we should have to make continuously versus saying like, let's put the priority of our bandwidth for thinking about making progress. Like, I know it's a hurdle to get over to make it a better user experience for contract deployers, but once that's accomplished, then it's done. It's better. It's fixed. And then we don't have to like keep coming back to it. So we can either fix it or make a Band-Aid. And I kind of am in favor of let's fix it, but I also know that I'm not the one writing the code to do that.
Yeah, no, I generally agree. I think it's something we should just fix. I think we'd still want to offer a few currencies, so we'd still have to update every time the ETH price, splits in half. But I think that's a lot less of a burden than worrying about whether SGT or Pearl or there are a lot of different projects, and we just don't want to have to worry about every one of their token prices since they're all idiosyncratic.
I do think it's worth kicking off a discussion about it around fees in general, because there is this kind of awkward admin stuff here. There is also the fact that the spam ratio is actually a function of the UMA price, not the dollar price. So we could actually hit something where we had spammable fee levels which were $400. It's kind of unlikely, but it's possible. And also, I kind of am starting to think that we should start incorporating other kinds of fees, like fees for contract deployers, into our contracts, or the possibilities of introducing them. So I think there's a lot of discussion that we could have around fees in general, and it would be good to start kicking that off.
Yeah, I think so.
Definitely.
Cool.
What do you think's the best, Barry, what do you think is the best medium for that?
I mean, putting up some kind of discussion thread in Slack for now.
Okay.
What do you think?
I don't know. I think discourse would be good. So
yeah,
community can participate and see everything. And yeah.
I mean, one thing that I didn't realize was that the final fee stuff was such a pain point for governance and for the deployers. So is this something that's been a big pain point for a long period of time, or is this something that's just kind of nagging the group of people that are on this call, or is this a wider? I don't know. I'm just curious how big of a pain point this is and how long it's been a problem, because it's not one of the things that we've talked about a bunch, at least internally. So I'm kind of, just curious.
When the market is kind of working as normal, then final fees are gradually going up. The problem really is a market crash, because you don't want it too low, which is a concern, whereas you can keep it higher for a bit. So the pain has been exacerbated by the market crash, which threw almost all of our collateral into a range of about 250 to 300. So any volatility, highly volatile currencies, are likely to go outside the $300 to $700 limit, which is what we've been reading them back in on. So it's not that much of a pain until it is.
I see.
I also think with the more omnibus UMIPs coming through, just the scalability aspect of it has introduced a little bit of a pain point, because you'll write an omnibus UMIP, and then by the time it goes to vote, it already needs to be adjusted or something like that, which again, that goes back to the market volatility, but just like mentioning scalability as a early indicator of future pain points around that.
So do deployers get annoyed by this, or is this mainly something that are, the people involved in governance are like, is it a pain point is for the scalability of kind of the this group, which is, I think, as much if not more of a concern than deployer pain. But I'm just curious if deployers have complained about it.
I can't speak to that because I'm not in touch with deployers. Definitely on our side.
I don't think so. I don't think deployers really care if final fees are too low. They probably like it better.
Or like if they're trying to put UMIPs together to get a collateral currency approved for what they, like if I'm a deployer and I have my own token and I'm like, oh, I need to get this approved, and then trying to understand the final fee system. Is it like confusing for them, or they don't like it, or like kind of a pain point in that respect?
I don't think it is. I think especially because we have like the UMIP reviewers helping with that.
Okay, cool. So mainly a pain point for the governance system.
Yeah, and I agree with Britt's point about scalability. Like when we were making the proposal for the latest fee adjustment, it's like a lot of numbers and addresses to double check. And so if you 10x that and then have to do that on a regular basis, that gets really annoying, I guess.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
I would argue that it's not like, I mean, having one UPP that was annoying to propose and write, I don't think necessarily indicates that there's a scalability problem. So I don't think it's like an immediate like game-breaking pain point, I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, you can always write a script to do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what I was thinking, so, like an OO kind of system that would kind of adjust it continuously might also help to relieve that you won't have like a bunch just piling up.
Yeah.
Is that actually easier though?
Yeah, I don't know if like allowing the OO to do governance stuff is actually that easy. It seems hard to me. Although I'm not like, there may be other ways of doing it that I can't see, but it seems hard.
I also think that's way more confusing and is potentially a security concern. Yeah. And also I think like part of the reason why we're thinking like final fees are a little bit of a pain is like we can't adjust them very frequently because we have like one vote a week or whatever. So it'd be like nice to be able to like adjust them more frequently, like when there's a market downturn or something. And I would say like we can, like if like final fees are a security concern because we're being spammed with requests from some really cheap token, then like we can like have votes out of cycle, of course. And I'd also argue that like having a vote once a week is like more scalable right now than having continuous votes with like the optimistic oracle or something. Yeah, just doing them all at once is like an easier process than doing like one at a time.
Yeah.
I think there's a big discussion here, and I agree that discourse is probably the best place for it. Will I put something up in the general channel in discourse, and we can start highlighting some of the discussion that we've had today?
Cool. That sounds good to me.
Excellent. I'll ping you all into it. So, well, thanks for everyone for attending this week's community call. Thanks especially to Rainas, who's been taken away in the background. And I'll see you all next week.
Thanks, Laurie.
Thanks, y'all.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.